we are going to jump into logical reasoning now. I am going to tell you some core stuff about logical reasoning, and then we'll do a couple problems that test structure. But here's the one thing to keep in mind about logical reasoning. Logical reasoning, you have a short passage, and then you have a question, and then you have 5 answer choices, right? And for most people, the question is won or lost in the passage itself. So what happens is you read the passage. Right now, if you're just getting started or familiar with the LSAT, it either clicks or it doesn't. You look at the question and you start going through the answer choices and you're like, yeah, that sounds good to me. And then you pick your answer. But I want you to be much more proactive. So try to figure out what the answer is before you even know what the question is. Now that might sound ridiculous, but it's actually not. So what happens in practice is I read sentence by sentence and I just try to understand what each sentence is saying, right? And assess it on my own terms. So what does understanding involve? Understanding involves reading the sentence and then trying to visualize it and understand it as well as you can. And then trying to relate that to the world that you know, right? So a lot of times I'm reading a sentence, stopping, and then being like, oh, okay, I get what you're trying to say. And then there's like, once you understand what that sentence is trying to say, you usually this doesn't take a lot of work. You usually think about that for a half second and you either agree with it or disagree with it, right? You're like, yeah, that seems kind of familiar with the world I know, or that doesn't seem familiar with the world I know. But the bottom line is, if you have an assessment of whether or not you think that sentence is good or bad or makes sense, then the sentence probably did click for you. Most people are reading too fast. They're just like, and they get done with the passage and it's like, which one following is true would most strengthen the argument? And you're like, I don't know, what was the argument about again? Like, you want to understand each of these sentences well enough that you can assess whether or not you think that they make sense to you in the real world. Okay, so when you're done reading this passage, it's going to fall into one of two categories. It's either going to be a set of facts or it's going to be an argument. That's it. Does anyone know what makes a passage an argument rather than a set of facts?
It's making a claim.
Okay, so one thing about claims is that every sentence is a claim and has multiple claims. So when you look at a passage, you say, oh, that's a set of facts. Well, that set of facts may have 4 claims. So we got to go a little bit further. What makes a passage an argument rather than a set of facts? Yeah?
To take a position.
It takes a position, okay? And
An opposing position.
well, there presumably is an opposing position and may or may not mention it. But the point is that it's taken a position and it's offered at least one piece of evidence in favor of that position. So every argument has to have at least 2 claims. One claim or statement is a premise or a piece of evidence that's being used to support another claim, which is the conclusion. Now, most arguments on the LSAT suck, which means the evidence that's being used in support of the conclusion fails. There's not enough evidence for the conclusion. Welcome to the world of lawyering, right? Like, they have to make an argument, they have some evidence for their conclusion, but they may not have all the evidence, which is why there's an argument going on in the first place, right? If your evidence was so rock solid, the other side would settle. It'd say, thank you, we'll take what we can take. Nice talking to you. But in any case, in logical reasoning, I would say about 75% of the passages are arguments, and of those, probably 90% of them or more are flawed. In other words, the evidence is not sufficient to prove the conclusion. Tonight, when we go through these examples, what I want you to do is I want you first to read and just try to understand what you think the passage is saying. Then, I want you to decide Is this an argument? Is this person trying to convince me of something? And if so, which claim is that person's conclusion? Right? Like, if you have an argument, you have a passage, and there are 4 sentences in that passage, the conclusion or the thing that the author is trying to convince you of could be at the beginning, it could be in the middle, or it could be at the end. Just because we call it a conclusion doesn't mean it comes at the end. So figure out where that conclusion is, and ask yourself, okay, well, let's say the conclusion was right there. That's the conclusion, got it, that's what the person is trying to convince me of. How good of a job have they done? I'll give you a quick example right now. Let's say I said to you, all candy is gross. Sound good? All candy is gross. Therefore, you shouldn't buy it. All right. What do you think? Is this a good argument or bad?
Bad.
Why do you say it's bad?
Lacks evidence.
Okay, what is the evidence that we have here?
That you say it's gross.
Okay. So are you taking issue with that evidence? You're like, whoa, wait, hold up. I like some candy. Now, if I say all candy is gross, therefore you shouldn't buy it, you have to accept this premise. I call that P1 because that's the first premise and it's the only premise. But premises on the LSAT, you have to accept as true. So when we're attacking these arguments, we might say, whoa, like I'm reading this, I just told you, make sure you understand each sentence. When I read this first, if I read this first sentence, like all candy is gross, I'd be like, no, it's not. But if the next sentence says, therefore you shouldn't buy it, the therefore tells me that I just read a premise and that I'm about to read a conclusion. So I go, okay, fine. For the sake of argument, I will accept the fact that all candy is gross. So now you can't argue with that. You just have to be like, okay, it's gross. Does that mean that you shouldn't buy it? Okay, why not?
So there could be other reasons for you to buy it?
Yeah, maybe you can burn it. Or maybe you're starving and you need to eat gross things for a while, including candy. Like, I have no idea, right? But the point is that even if we accept that all candy, there's no exceptions, is gross, that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't buy it, even if you're somewhat convinced by this argument, right? So the real test on the LSAT is not what are all the problems with the argument. The real test is, even if I accept your premises as true, why is it the case that your conclusion is still not necessarily true? Now, could anyone fix this argument? Make it all good? By fix it, I mean you now have the opportunity. I'm giving you the opportunity to add anything to this argument that you want to add. You can add another piece of evidence, add another premise. What would you add to it to make it good?
Candy is gross and will kill you?
Okay. So now we do know that all candy is gross, right? And you're like, so that we don't have to add. It's already there. But we'll go ahead and add your premise. And by the way, it's a premise, so we have to accept it, right? No one can be like, hey, candy doesn't kill you. You just tell them to shut up. You say, it's a premise. Candy kills you. Okay, therefore, you shouldn't buy it. Is the argument good now?
You can still buy it and burn it, like you said.
You can still buy it and burn it. Okay, anyone want to add more premises here? Yeah, go for it.
You shouldn't buy gross things.
Okay, so if you said shouldn't buy, you shouldn't buy gross things, right? And we know that all candy is gross. Can you safely conclude that you shouldn't buy candy? Right, so half of us are nodding, the other half are sitting stoically. What time is
It's
it?
if and then.
Huh?
It seems like a simple if and then scenario. If all these things are gross and you shouldn't buy gross things, then you shouldn't buy all these things.
It's good now. That's all we had to do. So, when they tell you the candy is gross and then therefore you shouldn't buy it, you should stop and say, okay, I see what you're trying to say, but your argument sucks. Here's how I fix it. You shouldn't buy gross things. Because if you shouldn't buy gross things and candy's gross, then you shouldn't buy candy. End of story. Right? So all we have to do is come up with our own premise that connects what we know to what we don't know. And what we know is the premises, and what we don't know is the conclusion. Sound good? Okay. That went faster than usual. A lot of times people keep adding more premises. Like, it can kill you and your friends. Like, okay, but should you buy it? I don't know. They're like, oh, it not only kills you, but if you burn it, it will kill you then too. Like, it's getting better. You're making the argument better, right? The candy's getting worse and worse, but it still doesn't mean you shouldn't buy it. Like, who knows? Maybe you work for the DoD and you're like, yes, that's why I want a lot of it. Thank you for making my argument for me, right? But who knew, right? Who knew? The class would get so morbid so quickly. But anyways,
Wait, quick question.
yeah.
Okay, so are you making the conclusion one of the premises, basically? Like that's
No, we didn't say actually. So what we said, remember, what was the premise? Premise was
that candy is gross.
all candy is gross, right? No exceptions. And then what was the conclusion?
Therefore, you shouldn't buy it.
You shouldn't buy
Candy.
candy.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise, what was your name again?
Me?
Yeah,
Carolyn.
Carolyn. What premise did Carolyn add? Do you remember?
You shouldn't buy gross things.
You shouldn't buy gross things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we added. So we said, okay, premise 1, all candy is gross. Premise 2, you shouldn't buy gross things. And if you take those two premises and put them together, then you can safely conclude that you shouldn't buy candy. Yeah. Now you could do that. It's kind of a lame way to fix an argument, but you just add the conclusion to the premises.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if my conclusion were, you should always eat vanilla ice cream. And the premise was like, vanilla ice cream tastes good. Well, it doesn't mean you should always eat it, right? Yeah, things taste good that we shouldn't always eat. But you could just add to the premises, you should always eat vanilla ice cream. That would prove the conclusion, because we have to accept premises as true, but it's not usually how the LSAT operates. Usually we're adding things that are slightly different than the conclusion, but enough to make the conclusion true in combination with other premises. Cool. All right, any questions about any of that? So, our job is to read carefully, make sure we understand what the argument is saying, or the passage really, and then decide whether you think it's a set of facts or an argument. If it's an argument, identify where you think the conclusion is, and figure out whether you think that conclusion is supported or not. Now, it doesn't take too long for people to kind of get the gist. And they start getting pretty aggressive with the test, and I say, what do you guys think of this? And they say, it's an argument. What do you think? It's horrible. Yeah, you're right, it's horrible. And then it's like, why is it horrible? I don't know. It's just not very good. You gotta think about like, why doesn't it quite get there? And you know that you've assessed the argument well enough if you can identify how you'd fix it. If you can figure out how to fix it, then you know what's missing, right? All right. Any questions about any of that? A couple other things to keep in mind. I don't want to throw too much at you because if I've learned over time, if I throw 10 things at you, you'll remember none of them. If I throw one thing at you, you might actually remember. So the most important thing here is to understand. And then the second most important thing is to figure out whether you think the conclusion is supported or not. Okay? Those are the two most important things. A few other things just to throw out there, secondary, don't worry about it too much. But there are premises in an argument. There's the main conclusion. Every argument will have at least one of those two things. But in addition to those things, you can find opinions of others. Like, you might have seen this on the test on Saturday. Some scientists argue that the world is full of mean people. And then it's like, but no one's actually mean. They just have different goals than you, right? Or something like that. So the point is many scientists argue that the world is full of mean people, that's an opinion of someone else, not the opinion of the author. Right? Then you have concessions, and then you have intermediate conclusions. So concessions are things in which you like concede that, yeah, I agree that this is true. Not trying to be controversial here or anything, but you could concede, for example, that you know, Trump doesn't know how to text or something like that. Some of you are like, no, he knows how to text, perfectly fine. I don't want to offend anyone, but some people might concede that he doesn't know how to text, but despite that, he should still be reelected because I can't really think of anything right now, but for whatever reason, right? Like you could concede. You concede a weakness, and so ultimately, what is that? A concession is also known as a counter premise because it ultimately hurts your conclusion that he should be reelected, but you admit it anyways to prevent counter-argument, right? Okay, so you have premises, you have main conclusions, you have opinions of other people, you have counter-premises or concessions, and then you have intermediate conclusions. Intermediate conclusions are just conclusions that are supported by another premise in the argument, but they're not the ultimate conclusion. They turn around and they are used as support for the main conclusion. One thing to keep in mind, you have to accept premises as true, but you don't have to accept intermediate conclusions as true. Okay? So if someone tries to convince you of something, that's something you don't have to accept as true. But if they just say it as a given, you have to accept it as true.
What would be an example?
Yeah, I don't know the difference.
Between an intermediate conclusion and a main conclusion? Okay.
No,
so-
in a premise.
oh, a premise and an intermediate conclusion.
Right.
Okay, so an intermediate conclusion is a premise. It's just not solely a premise. So let me give you a quick example. If I said to you, okay, the iPhone 11 has a cooler camera than the iPhone 10. That's just a fact. So that's a premise. Therefore, it will allow you to take better pictures. Right? It's got a cooler camera, and that's a fact. You're like, okay, accepted. Therefore, you can take better pictures. Now, if one phone has a cooler camera than another, does that necessarily mean that you will be able to take better pictures?
You say it does, it does.
Well, no. Okay, so what you have to accept is true is that it has a cooler camera.
Oh, okay.
But you don't necessarily have to. You don't have to accept the claims that are based on that claim.
Okay.
So if I say therefore, you can take better pictures, you might agree. You might be like, yeah, a cooler camera means you can take a better picture. But you have to ask yourself, does that guarantee that? Because if it doesn't, that's a jump in reasoning. That's a flaw. Now, I may then turn around and say, oh, and therefore, because you can take better pictures, you should buy the 11 instead of the 10. Right? Well, what I've just done is I gave you a premise. The camera is cooler. I then drew a conclusion on the basis of that. I said, oh, you can take better pictures. And then I said, because you can take better pictures, main conclusion, you should buy the 11 rather than the 10. So this supports this, and this supports that. This you have to accept. I don't know why I did that. I don't know what that means. This you have to accept as true. Like I say, hey, it's a cooler camera. You can't be like, no, it's not. The 10 was cooler. They went back. Those idiots. Like you just have to accept it, right? So that's why I do that, because you can't argue with it. Doesn't matter what you think. But this is all up for debate, right? Like you could be mad about that. You could be like, hey, just because it's cooler doesn't mean it's better, right? And so anytime someone draws a conclusion on the basis of evidence, you want to stop and ask yourself, does that have to be true? Because if it doesn't have to be true, then bam, that's a flaw, that's an error in the reasoning, and that could very well lead you right to the correct answer. Because whether they ask you to strengthen the argument, to weaken the argument, to figure out the flaw in the argument, what's the necessary assumption, what's the sufficient assumption, all those questions hinge on the gaps in reasoning, on the jumps. So anytime an argument takes a jump, you want to spot that and be like, whoa, hold up. Just because it can kill you doesn't mean you shouldn't buy it. Right? That's our job. So anytime we see a jump, we catch it and think about why it's not necessarily something that follows. Then if you say it takes better pictures, therefore you should buy it, well, that's even worse. Why is that not necessarily true? I mean, it takes better pictures. Let's assume that that argument or that conclusion has been proven, that it does in fact take better pictures. Does that mean you should buy it? Why not?
You could have better things to spend your money on.
Sure. Yeah, the other one could be a lot cheaper, right? Yeah, it's half the price. Is that worth it? There's so many other things that go into consideration, right? So again, it's all about like, yeah, that could be true, but it doesn't have to be true, and that's what we're trying to spot. They're really training you right now at this point in your life to become great future attorneys. In other words, assholes, right? Because someone, you have a contract and you go to your attorney and you're like, don't they have to give me a refund? No, not technically. It said here, right, that you can only get one refund per address, right? Samsung did this. You guys know about this? And a whole apartment complex, only one refund per address. And they said it was street address instead of apartment, right? So anyways, they got sued.
Wow.
And FTC said, no, you can't do that. That's deceptive. But in any case, that's our job, right? Is to be like really technical. Say, yes, I see what you're trying to conclude, but that does not necessarily follow from the evidence provided. All right. So last thing I want to talk about here is we have these 5 parts of the argument. There's one more part. It's I just talked about being an asshole, but assumptions, right? Assumptions are outside the argument. So these 5 things could be inside the argument, explicitly stated. An assumption is outside the argument. An assumption, does anyone know what an assumption is?
Is it the same as infer?
It's actually different. You can infer assumptions when you look at an argument. You can say, oh, you must be thinking this, but it's technically something that's a little bit different. An inference is anything that must be true given what was said. So if I say, I like ice cream, well, what's something that must be true given what I said? Well, it must be true that ice cream exists. It must be true that I exist. It must be true that I like ice cream. And that's something that was already said. But that's okay. An inference is anything that must be true given what was said, so that could include restatements of things that were said. But an assumption is an unstated premise. It's a piece of evidence that was never said.
So if you say, I eat ice cream every day, we can assume you like ice cream.
No. Now, if I said I eat ice, well, to give you an example of an assumption, if I said to you, I like ice cream, therefore you should buy me ice cream. What am I assuming there?
That I like you enough to buy you ice cream?
That I like you. Not necessarily. You might buy things from people you don't like. Right?
No.
That I have the money for it. That I have money to buy ice cream.
Wait, what?
That I have money to
So you have
buy
money
ice
to
cream.
spend, right? That in this, if anyone were to fix that argument, how would you fix it? I like ice cream, therefore you should buy it for me. How do you fix that argument? Yes?
Another person like, do you have enough money for ice cream?
Okay, wait, hold up. So let's say we add that. We add that premise. Aha, it was an unstated premise. I have enough, you have enough ice cream, or you have enough money to buy me ice cream. Does that now justify the conclusion that you should buy it for me?
No.
I hope all of you have enough money to buy ice cream. It's like $3, right? So, based on that assumption, right, and the fact that I like it, you should all buy me ice cream now. Yeah? Okay, what else could we add?
And we want to buy you something?
Okay, so I like ice cream, you have enough money to buy me ice cream, and you want to buy me something. Does that mean you should buy me ice cream? So when I ask you, does that mean is the conclusion true? I'm asking you, does it have to be true? You can think about this in terms of logic games. if I told you I like ice cream, you have enough money to buy ice cream, and you want to buy me something, does that necessarily force you to buy me ice cream?
No.
No, you can just, I don't know, buy me a lollipop. Okay, can we fix the argument? Yes?
You own an ice cream?
You owe me an ice cream. Okay, so I like ice cream, you have enough money to buy me ice cream, you want to buy me something, and you owe me an ice cream. Does that mean you should buy me an ice cream? What do you think? Do you think you now should? Is that guaranteed to be true? Why not? What are we assuming even there?
That you don't have one or anything else.
Well, does anyone note the assumption there? I mean, we're getting closer, right? It's like before, we're getting warmer. The conclusion is getting closer to being supported or proven, really. But just because you owe me an ice cream, does that mean that you should buy me one?
Not necessarily.
How do you make it so that it has to be true, that you should buy me an ice cream?
You
You said you'd buy me an ice cream.
I have to buy you an ice cream.
You should buy me
You
something.
promised me ice cream.
Okay, let's go with, so have to, that's probably like the closest, and there's a little ambiguity there because of the way LSAT treats must versus should. But let's say that what'd you say?
Promised me.
You promised me. Okay, so let's say you promised me ice cream. Sound good? And I want ice cream, I like ice cream, you want to buy me something, you owe me ice cream, and you promised it to me. Does that mean you should buy it for me?
No, people do that.
So here's the way to fix it, guys. Here's the way to fix it. This is what you can do every time. It's so easy. You just say, what was the original premise? I like ice cream, right? You say, okay, and then you're saying, therefore you should buy it for me? You're like, whatever. There's a lot of things I'm sure you like, but I don't want to buy them for you, and I don't feel like I should buy them for you. But you could just add a premise that says, I should buy, or you, I guess, you should buy anything that I like. Right? If you added that premise, as crazy it is, because remember premises you have to accept as true. You should buy anything for me that I like, right? And by the way, I like ice cream, right? Then you should buy me ice cream. Now the argument makes sense, yeah.
I know you just mentioned like that must is true, but why would should versus must? Would that matter?
Yeah, it depends on how they use the word must.
Because
Um,
I like ice cream, you should buy me ice cream, like doesn't that hit the same roadblock as opposed to like you must buy me things I like?
You must, well, because see, what you must do is not necessarily the same as what you should do. So there's
Okay.
there's a little ambiguity there, but thankfully they don't really test it. So,
Cool.
but so the way they would fix it is they would just add an argument that says, or a sentence that says should, right? So let's say that we had gotten all the way there. The argument was much better than where it started. I like ice cream. You want to buy me something, and you've promised Richard to buy me ice cream. Does that mean I should buy ice cream, or that you should buy me ice cream? Not necessarily, but what could you add to that argument to make it work?
You should keep your promises, or
Yeah, you should keep your promises. Now we've added that should, and it's like, well, I promised to buy him ice cream, and there's a premise that says I should keep my promises. Well, then I should buy him ice cream. But that was the problem, is that we kept saying things, but we didn't fill in that last little jump that says you should do that then. Right? Like, if you owe me ice cream, cool. Does that mean you should buy it for me? Well, that's assuming that you should fulfill your obligations, right? We don't, there are times in your life where you're going to have obligations, someone say, don't fulfill that obligation. Well, I'm serious, right? That's what lawyers do. They're like, not that one. Yes, this one, but not that one. Okay.
Will it always show up like that, like the premise first and then it follows?
No, the conclusion can come anywhere in the passage, but your job is to identify where it is and then ask yourself, why isn't this proven? Now, in some cases it is. You may read the argument like, no, there's nothing I can do. If I accept these premises as true, I have to accept this conclusion as true. But in most cases, it's like what we just did. We keep making the argument better, or the LSAT makes the argument better, so you feel like it's good, but at the end of the day, the conclusion hasn't been proven, even if it's really, really close. Yeah.
this might seem quite unnecessary, but I was wondering, could there exist within the statement, I like ice cream, an assumption, perhaps that because I like ice cream, therefore I like ice or cold beverage or something?
I mean, if you like ice cream, it's possible that it might be safe to assume that you like at least one thing that's cold, but who knows? Maybe you like ice cream served melted, right? So you have to really be careful. We're just constantly questioning what's being said.
Ooh.
Right? Like someone stands up and they're like ice cream, and you're like, oh, cool, you must like cold things. And they're like,
No, not really.
no. It's always microwaved for 2 minutes. Bubbling. You know, it's like gross, but that's a possibility. Okay, cool? So let's do this. So don't worry, we'll jump into some examples. Again, I want you to focus on the two most important things, which are to understand the passage and then just try to decide whether you think it's an argument or a set of facts. If it's an argument, did they succeed? Chances are no. If not, why not? Okay? Then read the question and worry about what it's asking. If you've done that legwork up front, doesn't matter the question type. A lot of these questions are going to be super easy. You're going to be like, oh, that's all you're asking? This is easy. So, in any case,